Hey everyone, I'm Jessica with Spark, and I'm here today talking with Ollie Rankin. Ollie is a award-winning multidisciplinary artist. He's also the CEO and creative director of Pansensory Interactive, and he's worked on a project that we're going to talk about today. So Ollie, welcome to Spark.
Hey, thanks, Jessica. Great to be here.
Amazing. I guess I'm going to start off with some congratulations because I hear that the project that we're going to be talking about today has won a couple of awards at film festivals.
That's right, it did. Thank you. Yes, we submitted it to a few different festivals. We'll get into later why the timing of it made sense, but I wanted to get it into some festivals before the US election of just over a week ago. And of those, a couple came back. We were finalists for Best Experimental Short Film in the World Short Awards, I think, or no, the short independent short film awards, and we won best experimental short and best script at the um, world premiere short awards. There's all these kind of weird festivals that have very generic names, but yeah, some of them gave us prizes, so we're happy.
Amazing. Well, congratulations. So I'm glad that we're going to be talking about the project then today. Let's jump right in. The project name is The Pendulum.
That's right.
Um, tell us what it is. Tell us about what it is and the motivation behind it.
Yeah, so the pendulum, the name comes from a line of a poem that I wrote a few years ago, which forms the basis of the short film. And it's about the sort of swinging pendulum of sort of political power and public opinion, particularly in the US. It's a poem that I wrote after Donald Trump got elected the first time, as a way to vent some of my frustration and a way to maybe help sort of reframe some of the angst that was coming out about that. And it's a poem that I've rewritten several times of the last 8 years as I've gone through thinking that Trump was about to cease to be a figure in American politics. Obviously, that didn't happen, but this last incarnation of the poem um, was released as a way to hopefully sway a few people and or encourage some people to vote. Um, Perhaps it did, but certainly not enough to change the outcome of the election.
So when you were saying that you wrote some of the poetry, a term that comes to mind is the immersive theater hip hopera. What does that mean?
That's right. Yeah. So the pendulum is part of a larger project, which is called Rhymes with the Times, which is exactly that. It's an immersive theater, virtual reality immersive theater, spoken word hip opera, which is a whole word salad um, that's intended to convey the idea that it's an immersive theater experience where audiences are transported into a series of surreal worlds. If you could imagine an anthology with the same sort of visual diversity as a season of Love, Death, and Robots, but with the sort of social commentary of a season of Black Mirror, um, hopefully less bleak than Black Mirror, but we'll see. And I also like to say that it is inspired as much by Dr. Seuss as Dr. Dre. So it's this anthology of spoken word and rap performances that are that take place in a series of surreal worlds where the audience members are teleported into the world. They find themselves occupying a set of avatars that match the art direction of the world, and they have to collaborate together to solve a collaborative puzzle, like an escape room style puzzle. And upon solving that puzzle, that unlocks the performance. And then at the end of the performance, and these performances are kind of they involve puppetry and sort of projected graphics and sort of projection mapping and various other forms of animation in this sort of multimedia immersive performance that then at the culmination of each performance, the audience members get to vote on which world they teleport into next. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, that's the immersive theater hip opera that you referred to.
Amazing. So back to the pendulum.
Yeah,
This particular project, the subject matter obviously could be seen as quite controversial in a
for sure.
sense. Um, but I know, Ollie, that you're not one to shy away from opinion or presenting a strong opinion, I should say. I
Yeah,
talk a little bit about that and using using different devices to be able to deliver the message, but in a way that's appealing to the audience or the immersive participants.
yeah, absolutely. I think, as artists, we kind of have a duty to honestly express our opinions. And, I think we live in this world that's um, very polarized at the moment, and people are in these kind of bubbles of, different information bubbles and different social sort of echo chambers. And, I've been thinking that in order to sort of break out of those bubbles and to bridge the gaps, we need to explore all different kinds of art forms, of nonfiction, of all sorts of media, because we also live in a very sort of fractured time in terms of there are whole generations that exist on different social media platforms from each other and never get to interact with each other. So, you know, my philosophy is to um, to not rely on one particular medium to be able to reach people, but to try and break out of my own bubble, and to use sort of whatever tools, whatever art forms, whatever mediums, and also to use a combination of nonfiction, fiction, sort of comedy, anger, all to try and make people feel something, and to try and get a message across in all of the different ways that it can possibly be conveyed.
Mm-hmm. And just on that point of, using emotion as a device in the storytelling
Mhm.
um, arc, in a sense, what was kind of the motivation behind having the main character, who's Abraham Lincoln, in this particular
Right.
project? What was the motivation or inspiration behind having Lincoln perform the poetry?
Yeah, so that came about sort of fortuitously. So um, I'd long thought that the poem should take place in Washington, D.C., or the performance of the poem should take place in Washington, D.C. And as I was ideating how that could come about, um, I'd come up with the idea of, well, hey, instead of having the audience members be at a one-to-one scale of humans in Washington, D.C., how about the audience members are giants in Washington, D.C.? And that way they can run around and explore the whole of the city, rather than just, a small area of it. And then as I, was sort of mapping out the parts of Washington, D.C. that it made sense, by the time you have the White House, the Capitol building, the Supreme Court, some of these sort of iconic landscape buildings in Washington, D.C. featured in it. And one of those iconic landmarks at the end of the mall the opposite end of the mall from the Capitol building is the Lincoln Memorial. And that it's just as I was sort of mapping that out, I thought it would be amazing if it was the statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial, because that would now be at the right scale, the same sort of scale as the audience members. If he came to life, if that statue came to life and recited this poem, it would hopefully be even more powerful, coming from, such a historic figure.
Mhm. Was the intention always to have this project be immersive?
Yes, yes. So the fact that it's a short film is actually like the sort of the tangential aspect of it. It's still underway, the immersive project. And we've got, there's a dozen different worlds that are in various stages of ideation or production, including there's another world, which is like a living room, um, where instead of the audience being at a giant scale, the audience are at a tiny scale. So in this one, the audience are toys on the floor of a family's living room, and this family is transfixed by the giant TV screen, and the toys need to work together to figure out how to get up onto the coffee table to turn off the TV, and that's in that case that's what unlocks the performance. So in the case of the Abraham Lincoln one, the Pendulum, the puzzle, and there is actually a working puzzle that people can jump into the Sansar VR platform and try out. The puzzle there is to figure out how to put out all of these fires around Washington, D.C. And they do that by taking a water tower off the roof of a building and using that as a bucket, and either creating a human chain or sort of working collectively to put out these fires. So it is all part of this bigger immersive project, which is, still going to take quite some time to finish developing. But as I say, it was quite important to me to get this anti-Trump message out before the election, and that was why it turned into a short film and why it got submitted to a bunch of festivals.
And won and or placed.
Indeed.
Amazing. Um, yeah, you mentioned Sansar.
Mhm.
Can
That's right.
you just talk briefly about what Sansar is?
Yeah, so a lot of people have probably heard of Second Life. Sansar is an offshoot of Second Life. So it was originally developed by Linden Lab, the same company that made Second Life. And they'd kind of got to a point with Second Life, which, arguably is the first and still most successful social metaverse platform. They got to a point where they weren't able to make fundamental changes to the tech stack of Second Life without breaking a whole bunch of assets. And because there are a lot of people who still make a living off of selling assets in Second Life, um, my understanding is that that was the motivation, part of the motivation for developing Sansar as a separate standalone sort of software stack. And Sansar is, it's a VR first, although a lot of people don't experience it with VR. You can use a desktop gaming PC to, go in sort of in a third person mode to Sansar, but it's an immersive social platform. It's kind of like a grown-up version of Minecraft or Roblox, where, it's all about user-generated content, building worlds and developing sort of communities around those worlds and around the interchange of ideas and sort of creative collaboration. So I'd been, following Sansar for a few years, but I got involved directly with Sansar in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic caused the Glastonbury Music Festival to get cancelled for the first time. And I had already been working in hybrid live and VR music events by that at that point. So I was brought in to sort of help bring part of Glastonbury Music Festival into VR so that in 2020 they could still be a live multi-day, multi-stage music festival.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, we did that in 2020. We had, an amazing roster of DJs and bands like Fatboy Slim and Carl Cox and Seth Troxler, and the list goes on and on. And then in 2021, I did the same thing for Splendor in the Grass, which is a big music festival in Australia. We brought that into Sansar, and then the following year they hired me on as their vice president of live entertainment. So yeah, I've been working with Sansar for several years now. Um, it's yeah, it's an amazing platform, very powerful, beautiful real-time rendering engine, and I'm still very close with the team that continue to develop it and increase and expand its capabilities.
Mhm. So when you're touching on Unreal, I know that you use Unity as well.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, can we talk about, some of the platforms that you've had exposure to, or some of the different projects that you've done previously that even prepared you for what you've created here with the pendulum?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I guess the first of the 3D real-time engines that I ever used was Unity, and I've used that on and off over the last 10 years now. I first used it to develop a mobile game, and then in 2016 I was working in a startup in New York doing volumetric performance capture for VR, and we're creating immersive experiences in Unity. And Unity, still is, I imagine, or I feel like, one of the most sort of used platforms for immersive experiences. Things like even um, oh, damn it, now I'm blanking on the names of some of the other social VR platforms. Altspace is obviously no longer around, um, but that was built on Unity, and so was VR chat, which is, probably the other main platform for sort of user-generated social VR experiences. Um, Also built on a basis of Unity. So Unity, there's a huge community of Unity users, and it's a very capable platform. Similarly, Unreal is also, has a big user base and is a very capable platform. And all of these different platforms have their strengths and weaknesses. Unreal is famous for being one of the out of the box, one of the best looking real-time platforms out there. And I used it to make another award-winning short film a couple of years ago. And out of the box, yeah, it produces some of the best images, but it's very tailored to AAA game development. And in the last couple of years they've been really working hard to make it the default platform of choice for virtual production, for filmmaking, for like The Mandalorian, where they
Mhm.
put the actors on a stage with the screens behind. And so, I'm somebody who's sort of platform agnostic. I tend to go to whichever the platform is that either best meets the needs of the project that I'm working on, or where the team that I'm working with is most familiar. So I'll be honest, the main reason that we chose Sansar for Rhymes with the Times, and therefore the Pendulum, was that I was working with that team at a time when we all got furloughed. And so we already had kind of a shorthand among us as a creative team working together. We um, yeah, we pulled together, and we just carried on with the crew that we had working in Sanzar. Um, the beauty, of course, of a lot of these real-time engines is that they use the same industry standard file formats. So, FBX files and the sort of physically based rendering PBR style shaders means that the assets are portable between different platforms. So it's entirely possible that Rhymes with the Times will end up on a different platform in the end, and we are actually discussing that possibility at the moment. Stay tuned to find out which one we choose.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes, I mean that in an uplifting way, like a good way. Yeah, so dun dun dun. Um, I want to go back to give me a second here as I rewind in my brain. I want to go back to your mention of Unreal because I know that you were actually a participant in the Unreal Fellowship.
That's right.
Yeah, in that kind of context, when you're um, working solo or working
Hmm.
with a reduced creative team in a sense,
For
um,
sure.
what kind of comparisons exist between what you experienced in the fellowship and how the pendulum came about?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up because that's a very interesting thing, and that's one of the I think one of the things that got everybody excited about virtual production and using engines like Unreal for virtual production. Um, and I'm going to sort of go down two different tangents here. One is that, you know, by by doing things in real time, you're able to iterate and make creative choices and just try things out and see if they work, and if they don't, go back and try something different. You and I both have experience in the visual effects industry where the choices are, get baked in a lot earlier on. Um, or where you're sort of at the very last minute scrambling, but you don't have the whole creative team around, in real time being able to iterate together and try things out. Um, but the other aspect, and the thing that I found possibly, more interesting in terms of the democratization of, storytelling and filmmaking, is that, when you are both the director and the person on the box making the tweaks and twiddling the knobs and pushing the keys, you're able to make creative compromises much more sort of easily and much more pragmatically. When a director comes along who has no idea about the actual process of doing the work, and that director says, I want it to be like this, as a vendor or as a artist working for them, you can push back and say, well, that's going to be very difficult. How about this? But uh, a client or a director, um, without having that ability to sort of, to understand how the sausage is made, is often going to still push for, the non pragmatic solution, whereas the person that's actually there on the box, um, is able to say, you know what, I'm willing to compromise this aspect of the story, or this aspect of the visuals, or this aspect of, in order to not use up all of my time and energy trying to get one thing exactly how I envisioned it, and actually just saying, what I'm able to get by making this compromise tells the story as well as I needed to, and it doesn't, waste all of that energy.
So for like for the project, the pendulum, you
Hmm.
were working with an international team. Is
That's
that
right.
right? And
Yeah,
in that respect, just with what you're talking about, like being able to make creative choices and changes on the fly, and certain creative compromises as well. What was that like in the experience of working with an internationally based team?
for sure. Yeah, and I've always been a collaborator who, who believes that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when those parts are different from each other. So rather than wanting to sort of, dictate that things should be exactly as I see them, I like to give people an open-ended creative brief and allow them the sort of the creative freedom to, as much as they want to bring to the project, to make their own, to sort of leave their own stamp on it. And that's, especially helpful. That sort of attitude is especially helpful when you're working with people in different time zones, or when you're working with people who you only get to check in with once a week. So yeah, I think um, giving people that freedom to make those their own creative contributions, but also, as the director, the creative director of the project, I still have to, if somebody has gone astray and what they've produced, is not only different from what I imagined, but it doesn't meet the needs of the story, then I have to, ask them to do it again. Um,
How does that process work? Because, like going back to your experience in visual effects, right? Like you have your directive,
mhm.
you create something, you're presenting it in like a daily session kind of thing, you get your notes, you'll go back and rework. How does that work in real-time collaboration?
Yeah, and that's another thing that's beautiful about real-time collaboration, and especially a social VR type of world, is that, you know, any time of day or night, I can load up the world on my machine because we're all saving our changes into this one central location. So any
Mhm.
one of us at any time of day or night can jump in and try it out, and then we can also jump into it as a group, where, in a visual effects scenario, or a traditional 2D filmmaking scenario, you know you need everybody to physically be, well, traditionally you need everybody to physically be in the same screening room to watch the things together, whereas, we can all jump into the world either at the same time or at different times, and either, send notes to each other or communicate across Discord, or, each of us also has the ability to make changes. So, as the director, if it's a small change to the lighting or the positioning of an object, rather than giving that as a note to one of my collaborators, I just jump into edit mode and change it myself. So that's, a lot more responsive sort of style of working.
Mhm. Well, it cuts down on the not the creative, but the creation time
Hmm.
in a sense, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You think that that kind of process, that kind of workflow, uh, is in the general direction of the future of filmmaking and storytelling?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think there will always be directors who are hands off and just like to shout into a megaphone. Um, but, I also think that the new generation of filmmakers are going to be ones who are able to, um, make those little changes, or even sweeping changes. And I have worked with a number of directors over the years who were, who came from that kind of background. Um, Wes Ball, I think his name was, who directed the Maze Runner. He had come from a visual effects background, and he knew how to do things, and so, we were able to speak on a more, a less abstract level about what he wanted changed. But because we were working still on a 2D film, and because we were working, I was working in a proprietary studio pipeline, and he was only ever getting to interact with the imagery that we sent to him, he wasn't able to get in there and change things himself. But I think this new generation of directors, and a new generation of pipelines that allow people to get in and like make those changes in a real-time environment, is going to, yeah, save a lot of anguish and frustration.
Mhm. Well, you had mentioned the term, like democratizing the tools of creation, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess is fitting with the
Mhm.
theme of the pendulum itself.
Absolutely.
See what I did there? See what I did? Yeah. Um, Along with any kind of like new technology, obviously is I don't want to call it a buzzword because it is a thing, but it's getting a lot of attention lately, and that is the idea of artificial intelligence.
For sure.
Right. Did you use any kind of artificial intelligence as part of this project? And, maybe just in general, what kind of future do we see AI playing?
Yeah, so that's obviously the elephant or the mammoth or the herd of the herd of purple flying
There
unicorn
we go. Yeah.
elephants in the room.
The
Um,
subject for your next project. There you go.
yeah, so I studied AI. That was my main subject at university. And then I was lucky enough that I got to put AI to use immediately after graduating, building brains for orcs and elves and choreographing battle scenes in the Lord of the Rings. So I've been thinking for a long time about the application of AI to filmmaking. And obviously, this generation of generative AI that we're seeing now is very different than that was. And there's a lot of angst about AI stealing jobs from concept artists in particular, but also from animators and various other disciplines in filmmaking. And some of these studios are obviously buying up AI companies in order to streamline their pipelines. What I've seen from AI so far has led me actually to spend more money on human concept artists. So far the main use of AI that has gone into the pendulum, because I do experiment with all of the AI tools. Um, and I spent a couple of weeks using AI to try and generate concept art for one of the other vignettes in the Rhymes with the Times anthology, and just couldn't get it to give me what I wanted. I think one of the things that AI is really good at the moment is producing beautiful, cool images, and even beautiful, and it's getting better at beautiful, cool videos. But if you want it to give you something exact, you can't do that. You need to do almost as much work to trick the AI into giving you back what you want as if you hired a normal team of people to do it.
Mhm.
Because yeah, it is, it's designed to, mimic what it's been told looks cool, um, but it doesn't give as much weight to consistency or to, what you actually need to be able to tell a story. Um, so yeah, I'm not saying that it's never going to get there. I'm sure that it will get there, but the people that think is going to be like a one button filmmaking in the next few weeks, um, you know, yes, you can make a film with one button already today, but it's unwatchable.
Mhm.
The characters will change their appearance from shot to shot. You won't be able to have the sort of a cohesive narrative. So, I think as part of the suite of tools, AI is going to make it easier to do things that at the moment are really, menial, or it's going to allow us to do sort of repetitive jobs. Um, yeah, I think I think I'm generally optimistic about the use of AI as a creative tool, more so than I am about the use of AI for just about anything else. because I'm pretty worried about the way that it sort of encodes biases and reinforces existing stereotypes um,
Did you
and
come across it just on the topic of bias there when it
Mhm.
comes to, the incorporation of AI? Did you notice anything that stood out during like your experimentation with the pendulum?
Well, I'm gonna just jump off the pendulum for a second because at the same time as I was working on the pendulum, I also actually got invited to participate in the Culver Cup, which was an AI filmmaking contest, which um, had a deadline right around the same time as I was trying to get the pendulum finished. And in the end, after a month of trying to make a film in the suite of tools that were made available to the entrance to the Culver Cup, I hadn't produced anything that I was happy to put out into the public. But when I looked at the films that were actually shortlisted, the finalist films in the Culver Cup, one of the things that was really apparent was the only films that had kind of a cohesive narrative were ones where they had chosen really sort of generic stereotyped characters. So it was like an old white woman or an Asian man, and even though the character was different from shot to shot to shot, because it was such a stereotypical character, you kind of forgave it, and you're like, oh yeah, it's still an Asian man, so it must be the same character. But in a way that's you know, not only lazy but also a little bit sort of prejudicial.
Mhm. Well, as you say, like I guess that just kind of helps to reinforce the fact that for artificial intelligence, you wouldn't necessarily be able to rely on it solely for creative output. It's meant to be a tool in the creative toolbox
Yeah,
in itself, right? Like there's balance with everything, you know,
that's
the scales of justice. Look what I'm doing. I'm bringing it all back to the central theme here. Ollie, can just to bring it back to the Pendulum project, can you let people know where they can check out the film?
yeah, absolutely. If you look on Actually, if you follow me on LinkedIn or Facebook, either myself or Pansensory Interactive, or also the poet Heckler. That's the my poetry alter ego is called the Heckler.
Love
The
it.
handle is at the poet Heckler. On any of the social media platforms, you'll find the pendulum.
Amazing. I know that you said that the immersive portion of the pendulum is still a work in progress.
That's
Do
right.
you have any kind of ideas for what comes next? Does this kind of bookend the anthology
Well, I'm going to
you
have to
mentioned?
rewrite the
Or?
pendulum again because of the outcome of the election.
Mhm.
But I'm hoping to submit the anthology in a sort of a work in progress state to the Venice Biennale next year.
Oh, great.
So that's I think the goal would be to have three or four of the poem worlds ready and playable in time for the Venice Biennale next year, um, and then
Amazing.
from there.
Well, if you're going to do an open mic slam poetry session, you let me know where to find you.
Absolutely, I will probably be doing one in Penticton in the next few weeks.
Oh,
So
no way. Okay. Amazing. Yeah, we'll keep in touch. We'll round up offline here.
sounds good.
Um, Ollie, is there anything else that you want to mention about any of the topics that we touched on today? The democratization of creative tooling, artificial intelligence, anything like that? Anything that we missed?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, we'll have to insert that soundbite of dun 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 as a to be continued then.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for joining Spark and sharing some of the background with the projects that you're working on. I'm looking forward to hearing what happens going into 2025.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks, Ollie.
Cheers. Bye.